is the storytelling of Naomi.
During the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. A man with his wife and 2 sons went from Bethlehem of Judah to dwell in the territory of Moab. The name of that man was
Elimelech.
Thank you. The name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion.
Close enough.
Close enough. They were Ephraimites.
Ephrathites.
Thank you. From Bethlehem and Judah. They entered the territory of Moab and settled there. But Naomi's husband died. Then only she was left along with her 2 sons. They took wives for themselves. Moabite woman, the name of the first was Orpah, and the name of the second was Ruth. And they lived there for about 10 years. But both of the sons, Mahlon and Chilion, also died. Only the woman was left without her two children and without her husband.
Naomi stood in the middle of her home in Moab, and as she looked around, all she could see were memories. There was the bed that she used to share with her husband, the place where they would recline to eat, and there was the chair where she spent so many hours weaving clothing for her family. And now she was preparing to leave all of this behind. Naomi had done this once before. She had stood in the middle of her home in Bethlehem and looked around at all of the memories that she was leaving behind. But that time, it was different. That time, she had her husband and her 2 sons with her. That time, she was full of excitement and hope. But now, she was full of despair. Naomi wondered how she would be able to survive without a man to provide for her. She wondered how she would be able to provide for her 2 daughters-in-law. She wondered so much. But Moab, that place that had been full of food, was now full of famine, and she had received word that Bethlehem, that house of bread, was once again full of food. And so she knew she had to go. So Naomi packed up what little she could bring with her. She gathered her 2 daughters-in-law, and they set off to go towards Bethlehem. But when they weren't far away, Naomi realized how foolish this was. If she couldn't provide for herself, how would she ever be able to provide for her 2 daughters-in-law? And really, she was so overwhelmed with her grief that she just wanted to find a small corner of Bethlehem to wallow in self-pity and poverty until the Lord chose to take her as well. So Naomi stopped in her spot. She turned around and she looked Orpah and Ruth in the face, and she said, "This is absurd. What are we doing? You 2 must return to your mother's households, where you can remarry and have beautiful Moabite babies. Go back. May the Lord bless you." With tears streaming down their faces, Orpah and Ruth said, "No, we want to go with you, with your people." Naomi said, "No, I cannot provide husbands for you, biologically or otherwise. I cannot provide for you. You must return. The Lord has dealt bitterly with me, but may the Lord bless you." So Orpah kissed Naomi, and she left. Then Naomi turned to Ruth and said, "Look, your sister-in-law has done what I have asked. Now it is your turn to go." But Ruth turned to Naomi and said, "Do not stop me from going with you. For where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, there will I be buried. May the Lord do so for me." Naomi realized that she could not turn Ruth away. And so the two women went off together, mostly in silence, to Bethlehem. As they were approaching, all of the women of Bethlehem gathered together to greet them. They saw Naomi. They saw her sunken-in cheeks, her thinner frame. They could see the sorrow in her eyes, and they said to her, "Is this Naomi?" Naomi said, "Don't call me that. Don't call me pleasant. For the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. No, you must call me Mara. For all of the bitterness that I have experienced, for all of the suffering that I have experienced." Naomi was so consumed in her own grief in seeing these people again after so many years, in seeing these people without her husband and without her sons. She didn't even notice how the women were staring at Ruth. Naomi walked through the crowd, and Ruth followed her. They found some temporary shelter, and they settled in for what their life would become. When the time of harvest came, Ruth went out in the fields gleaning, picking up the leftover grain that the farmers and the hired hands left behind. And one day, Ruth came back with her outer garment full of grain, and she proudly proclaimed that Boaz had been so generous with her. And Naomi remembered that Boaz had been a relative of Elimelech's. For the first time, Naomi considered that maybe her life didn't have to be overwhelmed with self-pity and poverty. Maybe she could have a life again. And so when harvest season was over, Naomi concocted this plan. She told Ruth exactly what to do, how to dress, where to go, what to say. And Ruth did as she was told, plus more. Later that night, Ruth came back with even more grain than before, proudly proclaiming that Boaz did want to marry her, but that he had some strings to clean up first. So they waited until they heard word that Boaz was able to marry Ruth. And so they were married. The Lord opened Ruth's womb, and she conceived and bore a son. Soon after that little boy was born, the women of Bethlehem gathered around this family, and they said, "Blessed be God for providing this son, and for Ruth, who is better than 7 sons." And they put this little boy into Naomi's arms. And as Naomi looked at this baby boy, she saw hope. She knew that he would never be able to replace her husband or her 2 sons. But she now had someone to provide for her into her old age. This little boy was hope for her.
The neighborhood women gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They called his name Obed. He became Jesse's father and David's grandfather.
Word of God, word of life. Thanks
Thanks be to God.